A round of applause, please. Great. So we're here, episode number 406. We're here at Tropical Nomad every Monday. So Speak Up Monday, Destination Indonesia, is number one for entrepreneurism and social impact. This is, again, about 4 or 5 years now. I lose count of the years. Maybe I'm getting older. I lose count of the years, Terje. And, so tonight's very powerful because, many of us here, remember it's called Speak Up Monday, Destination Indonesia. So the idea is that it is an unapologetic view of the people, the places, the wonderful stories of those who call Bali home. Now, and Indonesia at large, by the way. So this can be those of us who are foreigners, who are not born here. It can also be Indonesians, so we have both. Tonight, what we have is an incredible history of Indonesia from a historical, geopolitical, legal perspective that impacts and affects us all, right? So if there's one episode that you should watch if you want to be based here in Indonesia, we'll get some more seats for you. This is the one tonight that you cannot miss. So my name is Robert Ian Bonnick. I'm the founder of Speak Up Monday, as well as RIB and Associates, growth strategist in Indonesia. So we co-create dynamic and valuable businesses for organizations basically in Indonesia and those who are foreign to Indonesia as well. So now, let's get on to Terje Nilsen. Firstly, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be back, I guess. I've been here a couple of times before, yeah?
Yeah, you have. So the thing which impresses me about you, there are a few. Now, I'll just share one or two, is like this. So I speak to many different legal consultants, people here which are helping us with visas, challenges with different aspects of government, be it the taxation department, be it the immigration department, and so on and so on and so on. But with you, what I found is that you stand in very rare air where you're one of the people who have been here for more than 3 decades, that you've basically, in that time, been working with each particular government incarnation along the way, and we're about to head towards another one. And you have this brilliant, amazing knack of being able to connect the dots of history that underpins the regulations. Whereas most people just quote the regulations verbatim without really knowing how and why and where they come from, you have this ability to be able to cite what is the thinking behind it and where that thinking has come from, which I think is really powerful, right? So I guess the first question that I'd like to ask you is, there are people here who know you, people here who don't. So this is the part to be a little bit selfish, and that's okay, and beat your own drum a little bit. But let us know, why should we listen to what you're saying? I know why I should, but maybe these people here don't. So give us a bit of a background into you and what brought you here and why you're here before us tonight.
Well, I actually came on a holiday 30 years ago, and I'm still here on a long holiday. No, I think, like you mentioned in the sort of intro, I guess, and what's been sent out, my parents were here, so I came here a lot as a kid, visiting them. Never sort of went to school here, but in and out on holidays. And actually on my father's side, we have we call it grandmother, but it's an auntie of my dad. She was a nurse in an Indonesian lepra hospital for 30 years, from 1926 to 1956. And she experienced firsthand the change of Indonesia being, the East Indies and the Dutch sort of rule into a new nation. She was actually captive by the Japanese as well for 3 years during the war. So we've always had a lot of history in our family and knowledge to Indonesia. My dad then was a sailor, but eventually started living and working here full time, and that's how I started traveling here as a kid. I don't think I ever planned to move here myself, but I was already on my way to do other things in Norway, and I had a business deal that went bad on the day of signature, so I went on a holiday to Indonesia, 1993, and I'm still here 31 years later. So I guess first time was actually 1970, which tells people how old I am. So that I think is the basis of my understanding. My parents used to joke to say that I was probably made here and something went wrong along the sort of path where the brain is half Indonesian, half expat. Obviously, I can't say I'm Indonesian because I don't look very Indonesian. But we're already into I'm so committed to Indonesia that I produced Miss Indonesia 2017, who sits in the back. That's my daughter.
The beautiful tear, everybody. She's getting quite embarrassed now, but Miss Indonesia 2017.
So it's actually fourth generation,
right,
yeah. And I think other than that, I've always had a passion, I guess. I feel I owe Indonesia a lot because I've had a wonderful life, meaningful time, if that makes sense. And it makes sense for me to try to give back, and if I can do that as part of a business, so much better. So we try to do what we call building bridges in between, in particular, maybe Nordic and Australians, like Nordic in Jakarta, because we deal with the Nordic countries and the embassies there, but also in here, obviously, anyone, but a lot of Australians, and try to create not just a business advice, but also an understanding towards Indonesia as a country, how it came to be, and like you're saying, the sort of path that Indonesia has been and is on. There is a logic in the what some would say madness. It's not madness. It's a path that Indonesia sees clearly, and we need to understand to be able to maximize our business and make a good impact for Indonesia and also our own businesses.
And look, appreciate that. One thing which I realized maybe I didn't do on the way in is tell us a little bit about your company, the name, and what it does. Yeah.
So Seven Stones is a company that we say in short that we do market entry services. So that means we do what everyone else does these days, set up PMAs, do the visas, taxes, accounting, legal advice, anything around a business setup and continued advice. So we have a few offices in Bali and then an office in Jakarta. So they're a bit different in the sense that Bali is a lot to do with hospitality, real estate, more and more now fintech and so on too. But in Jakarta, it's more corporation, waste management, renewable energy, and different aspects. So we kind of do the A to Z aspect doing that. But I think the value, if any, is that understanding of Indonesia, the understanding of where it's heading, so we can advise our clients on a little bit better maybe than most others in terms of risk management, what's going to come, what's going to not come. And we were discussing with a couple of people just before on the fear mongering that comes on the social media every now and then, and there's no reason for that. And others, being a little bit nervous about Indonesia, what is it not, and yeah, trying to remove that, because I think when you look at Indonesia over the last, since maybe 1998, when the sort of, I call it the counter coup after Suharto was removed, Indonesia's just gone in one direction, and there's been no serious retraction or anything going the wrong way since then. So it's just been constant improvements, and now quicker than ever.
We're going to get into that very soon. So I want to quickly make sure our audience are with us. So quick show of hands. Hands are these things you have at the end of your arms. All right, not yet. One always jumping the gun. So how many people have been in Indonesia less than 1 year? Raise your hand. Less than 1 year. All right, great. More than 5 years. Okay, so we got a few between 1 and 5 years. So more than 10 years. Great. Now we're really getting to see who's who. More than 20 years and beyond. Yeah. Got it. Okay. That's very good to know. So look, what we're going to do tonight, everyone, is to illustrate this pathway of the brilliance of Indonesia. We're going to take it in stages. And with each stage, we're going to illustrate with a few stories that then can maybe help to set it in your mind in a particular way that you might remember, right? So the aim of tonight is, as the title recommends and suggests, is to give you that understanding of kind of how the whole thing works from the ground up. Instead of trying to remember everything, remember this is recorded so you can watch it back afterwards, right? If you can leave with one or two things that you didn't know before you started, just stick with that. Don't try and overload your brain, okay? Because there's going to be a lot of information. So let's get started. So let's go back, and Terje, so just lead us off, maybe from the first president, and we go from there.
Yeah, I think most of us are aware that Indonesia for a long time was a Dutch colony. And if you look at the history of that, the VOC, or the trading company from the Netherlands, when they started, it was actually trade, maybe sometimes enforced. That company went bankrupt, and then the Dutch government took over, and that's when it went really bad and out of control. But in the 1900 and up, Indonesia started having thoughts and groups and movements to create independence, and it's actually a difficult process because Indonesia is a very complex country. There's different tribes, there's different cultures, different religions, and maybe it shouldn't have been a country, but I think that was how they unified to be able to get to the point of declaring independency, which they did in 1945, August the 17th. Then they had 4 years before that was acknowledged, 1949. The first president, and this is no joke, this is true, the first president of Indonesia was actually Balinese. And if you look it up in the history, you'll find it, Cokorda, which was a Dutch-motivated move to counter the Sukarno movement, which became known in history as the first president, but that was East Indonesia, he was the first president. So Sukarno was actually the second, but he's seen as the founding father. When he took power, there was a lot of anti-foreign, anti-colonial, anti-imperialism thought. So the whole Indonesian legal system is very socialistically motivated, actually. And that goes all the way into the constitution, the Undang-Undang Dasar, or the basic laws of Indonesia, which still impacts business today. So when we see issues that happens today, they may be related way back to those days. Indonesia was then moving forward with a very clear path, if you ask me, where they wanted to go. They were trying to create independency, not just in the sense that it was an independent country, but also not depending on other countries. It's a rich country, it has everything, and they knew already then natural resources. Into that path, and I keep recommending this book if you really want to understand what went on in those years and what happened up till the coup happened in 1965. There's a book called The Jakarta Project, and it really highlights very well the influence and what happened from, in particular, US and UK in those days to get rid of Sukarno and get a more Western-friendly government into place. And that was Suharto, who sat as a dictator in about 32 years, so from 1967 formally until 1998 when he was eventually removed. Through that period, there was only one man, one decision. It was a dictatorship. Some people remember it as a very stable period. There wasn't much going on. Those that had oppositional thoughts either disappeared or found their way back in line. But a lot of big international corporations came in particular within oil and gas, and the history that you can look up, there's something called the Berkeley Mafia, which all the advisors to the president came from the same university in the US. They were very influential, and several of them became ministers. There's people retiring and living here in Canggu, actually, that can tell you stories. I'm not going to mention names, but there is one guy who was the first officer from the World Bank in 1972 that came here. He still comes and goes. He's up in his 70s, but he can tell you some stories of what happened in those days. There's another guy who returned around the same time from Oxford University and represented Rothschild banking. So there was a lot of Western-influenced good or bad movements, depending on how you look at it. But one of the things I talk a lot about is that the narrative that a lot of foreigners have on Indonesia, I don't share that. I think Indonesia is perceived as kind of like, or used to be, a bit dark, jungle, developing country, but it's a beautiful country, and it's had a rich history before this. Suharto was then removed through a student uprising and local people. I was there living through it. Expats or white expats or even colored expats like yourself was never a target. The Chinese sort of paid the price, unfortunately, for that. But what they then called reformasi or reformation happened, and the first president after Suharto was then actually the vice president, Habibie, who just became a transitional president for 1 year, and the first free election since 1960s happened, which was a compromise between democratical motivated movements and also a bit of, I would say, maybe Muslim influence. So Gustur became the first elected president. In Bali at that time, there was actually very heavy reactions to that because they are traditionally with PDIP or Megawati, who by far won the election in those days. But Indonesia, I guess, wasn't totally ready for a female president, and he became the sort of middleman. Brilliant guy, very wise, very educated. Just one problem, he was totally blind, which then shouldn't have qualified him as a president. But he did actually a lot good. He sat for a couple of years, then Megawati became the president. And after Megawati, we have a figure known as SPY, or Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, was a general through the change of reformation and became a minister and eventually president for 2 periods. And then now we've had Jokowi for 9.5, almost 10 years. I think if the constitution would have allowed it, he would have probably gotten a 3rd period, but we're now we're 3 weeks away from an election, and I don't think, maybe you follow it, but you don't feel it the way that we used to in the past. Indonesia's kind of found its way of doing this very peacefully, very, very nicely. There's a bit of controversial aspects in the sense that one of the vice president candidates is Gibran, which is Jokowi's son, and some people see that as a move for him to create a political dynasty, but the ones that criticize him is also, you would say, a political dynasty, which is another part of Indonesia, and things we can talk more about, I guess, but yeah.
So look, that gives us a good intro. So we understand the first president was actually from Bali, right? But the first acknowledged president, Sukarno, with the Pancasila, the 5 guiding principles of Indonesia. Check that one out if you don't know what I'm talking about. Pancasila, right? Beautiful ideology. And this is what Indonesia is based upon. So also, to give you some reference point, there's about 280 million people, the 4th most populous nation on the planet. There's, I think, 200 languages, 500 cultures in Indonesia, over 17,000 plus islands. So one of the youngest, largest adopters of technology in the world. And this particular election that's being contested, I think we said 60% of those who are registered to vote are under the age of 35. I'll say that again, right? So 60% of those who are voting, we're talking about 280 million people, are under the age of 35. For me, that fills me with immense hope, right? I think that's phenomenal. I don't know any other country that can put forward those kind of numbers. So we're in a very rich country, which we're going to get a bit deeper into. But look, let me get back to you, Terje. So we spoke about the geopolitical, the legal aspects. So maybe if we can go back through that, but this time map or chart the course of the legal sphere and how that came through and where it's taking us today.
Yeah, I think as part of that too, that the geopolitical aspects that we talk about, and one of the reasons probably for why the coup happened in 1965 was that Indonesia wanted to be and still is and still want to be geopolitical neutral. They don't want to choose. They want to do business and deal with anyone, whether it's the Chinese, the Russians, the Americans, the European. They say everyone is welcome, but on our terms. And that was seen in some way as a threat. And Indonesia has a massively strategical location, seafairways, and so on, that everyone has an interest into. And I think today you can see that they're coming back to that path that Sukarno was onto, still saying that we're geopolitically neutral. They're starting to take a bit more space internationally in a good way, which I think is rightful, and it creates I think in many ways a safe haven for many investors, that Indonesia is a friendly people, friendly country. It's not China, it's not Russia, it's not the US, it's not Europe, it's kind of middle ground. But like we started to talk about, when Indonesia became a nation, a lot of the legal system was based on socialistically motivated regulations. Pancasila, part of that. Beautiful, beautiful thoughts and very valuable thoughts that today, what you talk about, the younger generation is embracing and understanding and talking about. And Jokowi has managed to push an awful lot of pride into his people over 10 years. He actually said that when he got elected the first time, that he was going to revolutionize a mindset that has been, held back for 32 years, and he kept his word on that part. But then through the Reformation, without any or very much regulations and structures being passed for 32 years, it was kind of like it's like a bottle of Coca-Cola. You shake it and it goes all over the place. So regulations was issued in different ministries, central to provincial to regency, that conflicted and became a massive issue, and it was just impossible, not impossible, but very difficult to do business. It was very lengthy. That kind of continued with what we spoke about, Gustur, Megawati, and then eventually SPY, who created some stability. There wasn't a massive change, but there was a stability where Indonesia could, find some ground, I guess, to consolidate itself economically. And then Jokowi came in and started consolidating. Maybe over the first 5 years, you can go to our webpage and you can actually find a history through his sort of path of what happened and not through that. But the first 5 years with him was very much about consolidating the government. And the last 5 years has been on changing the legal system to embrace a much more international approach. And one big pillar of that has been the omnibus law, who was a very bold move and actually started in 2018, but was passed late 2020 during COVID, which a lot of people saw as breaking the backbone of Indonesia's heavy bureaucracy. And when you look at what they did or are doing, still doing, over 3, maybe 4 years, is something that in a normal process would have taken 15, maybe 20 years. So it's a bold move. But that obviously creates a lot of challenges on how that is understood and socialized into the government, from central to provincial to regency, and also resistance in many elements. So it's a heavy job. Through that too, Indonesia has signed off on a lot of international trade agreements. I think there's about 16 or 17 by now, which also cements these relationships further and further. And I think that looking through that whole path, it's only going one way, and Indonesia is, I use the word normalizing itself as a country. Some of us don't like that, and I'm not saying I don't like it, but a lot of foreigners and probably also locals have gotten a bit spoiled with, we can do a lot of things here that isn't necessarily good or supportive of the general development. So some people feel that it's getting more difficult, but it's not. It's just getting more structured and more regulated and more fair, I guess. There is a bit of question mark, and I get this from quite a few, both here and in Jakarta, on the upcoming elections. And I don't know if you pay attention to it, but it's not just a presidential election. It's also the National Assembly. It's provincial level. It's regency level. It's all the way down. Everything is up for grab. So Indonesia has openly said that they want to pull back on a bit of centralized control to be able to push forward economical growth and prosperity for their people. But many people are ringing the alarm bells, saying this is democracy is at threat. And I tend to agree with the path of Jokowi and what happens, but others will say this could be abused. And I agree it could, but it remains to be seen, I guess, on where that heads, yeah.
One of the things which most people, again, we have people here, I think the largest in this audience anyway, is been here between 1 and 5 years, right, from our little straw poll earlier on. And talking to some of them earlier on, and obviously having some experience myself with me and Marina setting up business and stuff like that. So you mentioned before about, in an election year that we have from central government all the way down, provincial, all the way down to the village level. So being here during COVID, we kind of noticed that not was this always eye to eye, like the central government maybe said this, but then in Bali, in this particular Banjar, maybe the same instruction didn't quite make it through, right? Now, this also can be frustrating for some people. Let's say, and again, I look at people here, and I've had these conversations before, where it's like, right, how do we do X legally? They'll go to see 3 advisors, and they'll get 3 different answers, right? So again, for some people, there's this differentiation, this block, this separation between what is written and what actually comes to be where I am here based in Bali. So what would you say to that?
Yeah, I think part of that is also 1998 when the sort of Reformation happened. There was a lot of elements that had power and influence that took advantage of that, and this is not in particular to Bali or anywhere else, but sometimes maybe almost criminal elements became, bupatis, governors, whatever. So that has also put a bit of a burden on implementing and streamlining regulations. But yes, the omnibus law eliminated 15,000 laws and regulation being in conflicting statuses. So it's a massive, massive move. The bureaucracy resists that, and obviously one big aspect of that is transparency and corruption, and which some elements resist as well. But I think in general that we see a change that is for the better and much quicker than I thought it would happen. Indonesia doesn't have a tradition of presence of law like we are used to. You can go and find, which way a case will tip, based on early court decision, and that's a cultural aspect that Indonesia don't traditionally like winners or losers. So there's always some kind of out-of-court settlement. You even saw that in the last election where the losing president and vice president candidate became ministers in the Jokowi government. And everyone was saying, oh, that's not right. You can't do that. Where is the opposition? But that's actually something the US used to do. If the Democrats would win, they would have a Republican vice president or the other way around. So it's not a new thing. It's just the Western world kind of forgot about that. Let's come together and work together. But yeah, there is that presence of law or lack of presence of law. And some people struggle to sort of accept the omnibus law, which a lot of legal professors and so on will challenge and say that it may actually fall because it's too contradictory to a lot of the constitutional and undang-undang dasar or the basic law. So there is cases ongoing the whole time. One of them was the labor unions in terms of labor rights and so on being a big part of this. But it's difficult, very difficult to keep up to speed with the changes. And I think we see this a lot from also big governments, big companies that want to come in. They get confused. And we say, oh, it's all good, it's all positive, it's going the right direction, taxations, tax holidays, whatever it is. But they go like, we'll just wait for it to stabilize and then we'll come in. So it is, in all fairness, difficult. And depending on who you go to with this sort of open-ended legal system that Indonesia has had in the past, it's open to interpretations in many different ways. And I think, and it sounds maybe funny and a bit difficult to advise to bigger companies, but the best advice I can give to people is be transparent about your situation. Be fair, be open, seek advice, whether it's the government, immigration, whatever it is that you're dealing with, and they'll help you to find a solution that you can live with and accept.
There's a few things to unpack there, right? So, but before we do that, again, make sure the audience is with us. Another raise of hands. This will be the last time, which means it definitely won't be the last time, but that's okay. So raise your hands if you know what Bhinneka Tunggal Ika means. Raise your hands. Great. So raise your hands if you don't know what Bhinneka Tunggal Ika means. That's good. All right. So raise your hands if you know, we said it before, Pancasila. I think I've said it already, so you know. Good. Gotong Royong. Raise your hand if you know what it means. Great. All right. Thank you for the honesty and the transparency, right? So this is the important part which took me years to understand, right? And I'm going to let Terje explain it because it's better coming from him right now. So one of the things, I'll say one of the things that I began to realize, which you just said, which is this this understanding of everyone has to win, right? So it's like saving face or something. So I heard this and I didn't believe it at the time, but then I saw it so many times that it just hit me hard and I got it. It's like this. So if there's two people involved having a discussion or a disruption or a dispute of some description. So where I'm from, in the UK, in London, it's about he or she who has the best argument wins. Or, being a little bit closer to sailing a bit closer to the wind, he or she who's the strongest wins, right? So what was told to me by a Balinese friend many years ago was that no, it's not like that here. It's, you have your point of view, I have my point of view. Let's come together and find a solution that benefits us both. So I just wanted that one to sit, just to settle, right? It changed everything for me. From the time that, by the way, I always wear a crash helmet, right? But let's say I didn't, right? And I was pulled over by a police person, right? And you see a foreigner by the side of the road berating this official saying, why aren't you stopping this guy, that guy, this guy, that guy, da, 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 da. And I look at it from this perspective of, okay, he has his point of view, and then there is the law. Is he trying to find a way to meet in the middle, or is he trying to dig his heels in and believe that he is right and he is the stronger one? So when you look at this a bit deeper, you're coming with all sorts of examples that will carry, I guarantee, will carry all of their way through. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. So what I'd like to bring into this, Terje, so we spoke about Gotong Royong, and we spoke about Bhinneka Tunggal Ika. So can you explain what these two mean to people here in the context of this conversation of understanding Indonesia's history and why it's so important to know what these words mean and how they impact your everyday life?
Yeah, I think Bhinneka Tunggal Ika is part of not the constitution, but the Pancasila and the sort of bigger picture, and it actually means united in diversity, which Indonesia is all about. It's a colorful country with many different cultures and religions and languages and so on, but that concept holds them together, and this comes from Sukarno, the founding father, and probably has a much more ancient history beyond that too. I'm going to brag a bit again about my daughter. The most beautiful explanation I've seen on that was Miss Indonesia 2017, when she was in China with Miss Indonesia, and she used the Olympic rings to symbolize that, where different colors and different comes together, but it's all the same sort of message and language. So that's what it means, that we can all come together as long as we can talk to each other rather than getting lost in different narratives, which the world seems to be on the path to do these days. Social media helps us to drift off into rabbit holes and all kinds of madness, but Indonesia traditionally has that in them to, let's work this out, and we're different frequencies, but we can figure it out and adjust to a level or a mid-level that works for both of us. The Gotong Royong is come together, work together, and it was used to Jokowi's first and second government, in particular the second, when he embraced the losing opposition. The opposition president candidate that lost, Prabowo, became the Minister of Defense, and the vice president opposition candidate, Sandiaga Uno, became the Minister of Tourism. And that created for many Western worlds, again, they saw there's no opposition, but they got things done. They really got things done and moved the country forward in an epic way that I struggle to see. Even in Western world, we can brag about it. It's unheard of and really, really special. So those values, and there's people who suggested that Indonesia should actually, like I'm from Norway, we for some reason give out the Peace Prize, Nobel's Peace Prize, that Indonesia should have that because of that Bhinneka Ika Tunggal, Trihita Karana, these deep, deep concepts that would help the world to unify and come together. And I think through the next 5, 10, 15 years, Indonesia is going to lift up in a very different way and be that middle ground, I guess, for the geopolitical issues that we see with China, Ukraine, Russia, US, whatever it is that goes on, yeah.
So now what we're going to do, right, is we're going to give you the audience. So every Monday we have a studio audience, anything from 30 to 100. I think the most we've had is about 100, 150 here. Tropical Nomad in the garden, hanging from the ceiling, different screens. It was fun. Oh, that was crazy times. So welcome to join us every Monday, right? Come here, it's free. Just come and join. Keep an eye on social media, Speak Up Monday, Instagram, Speak Up Monday, Facebook. We'll give you an idea of what's coming, right? So for example, next week, ICP. So we just did this article for the New York Weekly, and it's about how Bali can come together from a traditional standpoint and a standpoint of innovation coming together. We started this blockchain group, technology group, a year and a half ago with Adrian Keat. Some of you would know Adrian, beautiful fella, lovely guy. And so from this group has come 6 or 7 projects, 2 of which are national projects now, backed by government, phenomenal. And it's about this intersection of culture, custom, tradition, innovation, and technology. It's incredible. So next week will be ICP, this disruptor hub. So we'll have Emilio, we'll have Grace Sabanda, who's from Jakarta, Emilio Bruno, and Tom Corley, who's Bali Investment Club. So that's next week. Make sure you come. You'll love it. So, audience, we have a third microphone, which Sister Ayo, or Brother Guzman, has in his hand. So with these microphones, normally we're used to doing this. It won't work with these ones, right? So be very directional. Don't eat it. I've seen people try. Right? But point it at your mouth and obviously speak. So with the questions, I'm going to give you this little piece of advice, right? So no more than 30 seconds for your question. Reason why, we had someone last week, the question, I don't think ever ended. It just kept going for like 5 minutes. It's like, oh my God. So about 30 seconds. I'm giving you some time now to consider and think about what your question would be. And then we're going to get that microphone to you, all right? So just let that settle. So Terje, we've been through the history of Indonesia, geopolitical, legal, omnibus law, to the philosophies that make Indonesia extremely unique. You know, the Pancasila, the 5 guiding principles of Indonesia. Out of that, Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, united in diversity. We spoke about Gotong Royong. We spoke about Tri Hita Karana here in Bali. So beautiful philosophies, which are not just, things to put on your wall or things to tell people because it's cool. But this is a living culture. So this is what is practiced on the ground, right? On the ground. It's not just a theory, right? So while we're on this topic, is there anything else with the topic for tonight, and you'll have time to talk about other things, but anything from the topic tonight that you think is really important for foreigners to understand within this framework of Indonesia from a legal, geopolitical, or from a philosophical standpoint that they should or must understand if they want to really set up roots here?
I think I see a lot of expats that comes in particular to Bali. When they walk off the plane, they open up and they take their brain out and put it aside, and they do things that they wouldn't do home. This may be business related or other aspects related. But I think one advice is to get out of your narrative, the narrative that you have, how you grew up, how you are set in your mindset, whether that is Western, Asian, whatever it is, and embrace and try to understand the Indonesian mindset and what we talked about, the philosophies, the legal system, and so on. There's not necessarily any right or wrong, but somewhere along the road. And what we have to understand is that we are in Indonesia, and I think it's important that we support the country that we're in. If not, we shouldn't really be here. And do our best to really understand that. And I think I argue sometimes too much, I guess, but with a Western narrative understanding of Indonesia. You can find all kinds of political advisors and whatever they sit in Europe or US and whatever, and I sometimes get angry and upset because it's this north-south, North Asian sort of views that to me makes absolutely no sense. So we got to get out of that, study the history, how this country came to be, the challenges that it has had and still have, and you'll be amazed on what has happened, and I think will continue to happen. in the very near future, it's going to be the fourth largest economy in the world. It has everything. It's a filthy rich country. It's a beautiful people. They embrace everyone as long as we adjust to being on their terms and values. And yeah, open up, meet people, see people. Like Bali is kind of a bit of an international sort of blended community, which I think is good in many ways and can be a soft entry into it. But deal with the locals. Go out there in the villages, whether that is Bali, Java, Kalimantan, wherever it is, and you'll see. Indonesia now is on its way to also create a new capital in Kalimantan. It's the most eco-friendly green city that is ever seen, and it's starting to open up the eyes internationally. This is going to be an icon as well. But I think that get out of your narrative, and many do in a beautiful way. But that, I think, is the best advice. Change your mindset. Like, you're a perfect example of how this hit you in many ways, and it sort of open you up, and you embrace it and find some deeper value to be here. I say I'm fortunate to be able to make a living, or sort of, by doing something I love and I'm passionate about, and that is building that bridge into Indonesia and between other countries.
Love it, brother. All right, questions. Don't be shy, unless it's a very deep question. Over here, Bianca. By the way, if you have a really private question, after this, we'll have some photos and have some fun. Be welcome to have a chat to Terje one-on-one, right? So we also have that available to you, yeah? So you don't need to kind of, spill your heart if you don't want to, right? Because you will be on camera, okay? So just wait for a moment while Guzman mics you up and spins this little camera around to see who's talking. Oh, did I forget to say that?
You didn't tell me
By the way,
that.
you've got a camera on you.
Wouldn't have volunteered to be the first question.
Did it again! All right, you're good.
Okay. Thank you, Terry. That was really positive and lovely. I think there's been a lot of narrative that's been negative around this election, so I feel much better now. I just wanted to ask you your opinion on the massive growth that we're seeing in Canggu, especially, and up the coast. Does it worry you? Are we in a point where there's going to be a bust, or are we getting to an unsustainable place here? I just would love your take on that.
I feel guilty when I get that question. I moved here together with my kids and now ex-wife, but 2004, and there was about 3 villas and 1 marung. We built what is now Finn's Recreation Club. It was then Canggu Club and the Canggu School. And that created a massive wave of people coming, in addition to the surfers down on Echo Beach. And it went out of control, and it still is out of control. Massive challenges that we've seen now with traffic, in particular through Christmas, but any day when you come through it's painful and difficult, and people talk about over-tourism. I think it's getting really good attention from the central government, and we will see solutions. Those are not necessarily short-term and kind of difficult to do, but I think the main point for me is that finally zoning regulations are being enforced. So you may have noticed, and I think it'll come, the police has figured out now that anyone building in a green belt can be criminalized. So it's illegal. You can be fined 5 billion or 4 years in jail for building in a green belt and doing business in a green belt. That to me is hope. We've talked a lot with, I don't know if you're familiar with PU, which is the Ministry of Public Building. They are the ones that do the zoning, and they know what the zoning is going to be for the next 20 years. They're developing technology where they can monitor this from satellites. And they can see whether suddenly there's a road in a green belt. They can go and do something about it. Bandung now, the regency that we're in right now, has regulations. And if you overbuilt in that, they may not tear your house down, but in addition to the land and building taxes, you're going to be fined a penalty every year because you've done an overbuild. So all of these things are coming. And I think we were discussing before we sort of took to the table here, Indonesia is not a traditionally legal system or country that sort of draws the line and says that's it. There's a clear path. Slowly, they're pushing in the right direction. So I'm very optimistic that for the future, and with Rob here, we talk a lot about Tabanan and other regencies, who I think will be beautiful, and I've put all my money and even my life. I live up in the hills of Batu Karu, waiting for everyone else to come. Not everyone, but some.
We're coming, Terry. We're coming.
So I am optimistic, and I think it'll find its way. I think it's going to be difficult to clear out this mess, but in some weird way it works, I guess. I think we all can take some responsibility and try to get rid of the, it's a nice word, not the worst element, but some of the less good elements that are just not what we should want to have in terms of incidents. You talked about the guys that doesn't want to wear a helmet. They want to do drunk driving, not just a little bit drunk, but totally drunk. All kinds of funny stuff that I think we don't need, and Indonesia or Bali could do very well without. But yes, I'm optimistic.
And one thing in relation to that question, Bianca, thank you, is and I like to hear it from Terje because it just sounds cool, right? So, central government, mass tourism, change of direction. Where is it heading now?
I think the middle ground is what happens, but I do think that Indonesia, if you follow the central government, and our friend Sandiaga Uno is now the Minister of Tourism, he talks a lot about this, quality, sustainable tourism is where they're heading. And the same thing, I think they'll push for that step by step. So infrastructure, sustainable building, whatever that means will come more and more, absolutely. And I think, back to the question that there's more than hope. I think it'll be good, yeah.
And so I was having this conversation earlier on today, not with Terje, we haven't spoken about it yet. And it was a conversation that there were a few people, again, no names shall be mentioned, who were basically saying, look, people are going to Thailand, they're going over here, there's less people in Bali. I heard one of the, again, not going to mention names, a particular property company who were focused on a particular market. That market is not really here. They're going to be slashing prices by 50% in the next 3 to 6 months, real estate. And they've done quite a lot of building, right? Just going to put it like that. I have questions after if you want to know who. Joking. So here's the thing, to that what I was saying was, well, great, if people want to take that option and go somewhere else, then that's okay, right? Because ultimately, as you just said, or confirmed, the Bali, people get worried about the over-tourism, and it's to good reason, right? Because it brings with it all sorts of challenges, waste, and how we dispose, and how do we regenerate the ecosystem. We had this conversation last week. So here's the thing, I think this direction taken of quality tourism, instead of mass tourism, which during COVID showed a particular outcome, I see it as a positive, right?
Yeah, I think you're touching on a few things, and I think that the property that you talked about and some of these developers was focused on specific markets and thinking it would never end. And I don't think for property it'll continue to go. It's kind of like hit that sort of little curve, and then it'll find its way and into different markets. But I also think, when you talk about, like, recently we've read about, these luxury tax or entertainment tax, spas, restaurants, whatever. That's one thing, and I think it's important to understand that regulation is not a Bali regulation. It's an Indonesian regulation that has been passed because Indonesia is still 95% Muslims, so there has to be some middle ground on regulations, and in a funny way, entertainment, spas, massage parlors, alcohol is not good, therefore we'll increase the taxes and people will stop going to that, at least the local population, not considering at all the impact that may have on Bali. It may also be influenced by the fact that we're in an election year and an unpopular decision comes through, and then someone in the government says yippee-ki-yay, will take it away, and that creates popularity and drive towards whatever path that certain elements want. So there's two motivations. I think with the elements of tourism, and I agree, I think it's good, but there are some aspects that we need to talk about, and these are the different markets that comes. The expat market is actually maybe just 40% of the actual market. The domestic market in Indonesia sees as much more viable and easy. So that's one aspect. They are not totally depending on foreigners. But what we've seen recently is that it keeps growing right now. It keeps growing because of Indians market. And you could see, again, Santiago Uno, or one of his directors said that, next year we want 1.5 million Chinese tourists to arrive to Indonesia, which means 1 million will come to Bali. And that means that arrivals will continue to grow, but certain markets are peaking. And in particular, as an example, maybe the Australian market was always had Bali as their number 1 destination, the most popular place to go. Today, it's number 7. And those things you can see, those are something that the government need to look at, and I think they do by addressing, the over-tourism. You come to Bali for 2 weeks and half of the time you spend in traffic jams or other experiences that just aren't good. So slowly it'll find its way, and I think those markets too will come back. But yeah, I agree. I think it's in general good.
Questions. So I sense there's another 1 or 2 questions here. So feel free to raise your hand. Just over here, Sister Ayu. Yeah, Amelia. So to give us, I think the camera's already on you, Amelia. You see, he knew you were coming next. I don't know. It's a vibe here.
Hello. My question is around what I understand to be changes to the...
A little closer, my darling. Yeah.
My question is around what I understand to be the changes to the capital investment requirements surrounding, for example, in our situation, having set up a company. It was 10 billion for the company, and now it's 10 billion per shareholder in order to obtain a KITAS again when it comes up for renewal. So in our situation, that would be 20 billion for my husband and I. I'm interested to know your thoughts on the intention as to why they've made that change, and also how you think that will affect the economy and people that already have PMA set up.
Yeah, I think there's a few aspects to that. One is actually the paid up capital that over the last couple of years, it's always been 10 billion. And the reason for that is that Indonesia has 3 different levels, small, medium, and large. And the only one they allow foreigners to invest in is large companies. And that has the 10 billion. In the past, it was paid up 2.5, and then over time, or lending to your company, the balance, you could qualify it over time. They then passed the regulation saying it's 10 billion paid up right away. And I actually had anxiety knowing that you were going to come to the show today and ask this question. He didn't even want to tell me what it was, but
for the record, I couldn't remember what the question was. Do you believe me?
But you probably have anxiety too, following the social media, Facebook, and all the warriors online. And if you have 10 billion, by all means, comply with that and put it in the bank. But when you set up the company, you sign what is called a statement letter that you have that capital asset available somewhere, and you'll take it from there. And the company actually is activated with 0 capital sometimes. And from then on, you invest in property or whatever business it is that you're doing. And it kind of works, I guess, a bit like a promissory note. You owe money to your own company. My argument for that to be okay at this stage, and I sort of have to do the sort of cover my ass CYA here, it may change. I don't think it will. But my answer to that is when you do what is known as the LKPM report, or the quarterly investment report, that gets responded by the system, by BKPM, who is the investment ministry, approved. So if BKPM doesn't have an issue about it, why should everyone on social media have an issue with it? When this letter went around, we had companies on that list already being approved and in compliance, so there was a glitch somewhere. But we contacted BKPM both on a provincial level and a central level, and we get the advice on how to work this out. There is probably, I don't know, 10, 20, 30,000 PMAs who's never qualified, and you can multiply that with maybe half of it being complied with. How many billions of dollars who's already invested? Does it make sense for Indonesia to shake that? Probably not. The problem also exists in what we call PT-PMDN, so domestic companies are doing exactly the same. So if they want to discipline the PMAs and suddenly say that, oh, you should do this, I think it'll be a big issue. There's other legal arguments on this too, and this is back to what we talked about before with trade agreements, like Indonesia has, and I know in particular because my home country, Norway, actually Indonesia is now my home country by heart, but where I come from, we have a trade agreement with Indonesia, and there is probably 15, 16, 17 of those existing, which governs these things, export, import, and also flow of capital investments. And some of these countries are now arguing, Australia being one of them, why is it difficult for our citizens to come to Indonesia and do the investment, while you can come to our country and set up much easier? So they're getting these legal arguments being contradictory to it. So slowly, I think it'll find its way. What happened then, and again, you had probably anxiety when the immigration news was out, and every agency on the island sent out emails saying, oh, you got to fix this, if not, you're in trouble and you'll be deported and whatever else, was that Pa Silmi, who is the new director of immigration, had very clear directives from the president in what they call residential status, which the investor Kitas comes under. They've lifted the platform. So they say, okay, you're residential, there's a second home, there's the golden visa, and the investor Kitas, we want to see that you're committed, really committed to get a residential status. You can still have shares, less than that in a company, and still work out visas. You can, in the next few weeks, get a working Kitas. There is a contradiction in the manpower regulation, which doesn't allow a shareholder to work for their company, so they need to iron that out, and that supposedly is happening. Or you can just be a shareholder. You don't take an active role. You have the company, someone runs your business, and you're on here on what they would call the digital nomad remote worker visa, which can be applied for 1, 3, or 5 years. So I don't, to me, that isn't dramatic. In regards to you and your husband, he was here too, wasn't he? He's in the back. So you could be the main shareholder, and he could come on a spouse, or you could take it up to 20 billion, depending a little bit on the level of investments that you have, and that's a conversation we can have. We can definitely find a solution to that, yeah. And I wouldn't worry.
There you go. So remember, what is it? Meet in the middle, right? Love it. It keeps coming up. So we're going to be coming close towards the end, and I've got some, they're not that difficult, but they're questions that I didn't even mention I was going to ask because they just popped in my head. But before we do that, just remember a few things. So number one is that if you have a private question for Terje, he'll stay behind for a little bit afterwards, so feel free to have a chat to him, right? That's one. Two, if you have a question that you have a burning desire to ask now in the next few minutes, let me know. Now, here's the thing. We have this series called Investing in Indonesia series, right? Which this isn't technically part of, but kind of is, right? So there are these 5 questions that we ask. So this is based upon this, right? So to create a thriving ecosystem, you need 4 things, but we optimized it to 5. So these things are in close proximity, okay? So one is the availability of capital, the availability of talent, the availability of projects, once we got, the availability of talent, capital, projects, friendly government support, and the last one will come in a second. So what we do is that a score out of 10, 1 being awful, room for improvement, 10 being amazing, nothing left to do here, we nailed it. So this is like a quick fire round in a way. So I'll refresh your memory in a second. So what I'd love you to do is to impart to us from your experience and your knowledge, which is extensive on the ground, where does Indonesia currently score for you? Okay? So we start off with this, right? So on the availability of capital, where does Indonesia score right now?
I think there's many ways of answering that. Today, it's already from a GDP perspective, the 7th largest economy in the world. Its debt exposure to GDP is less than 40%, so there is a lot of capital available. What Indonesians call hilirisasi, or the downstream of their businesses and natural resources, even though they've lost a few cases in the World Trade Organization, they keep enforcing, pushing money into the economy, and it works. So I think Indonesia, on a score, I'd probably say between 6 and 7. It can get better, but it's already good.
Brilliant. So the availability of talent.
Indonesia has an awful lot of talents all over the place. A lot of them, through earlier governments and policies, has disappeared out. We can see this in particular, one of the topics you like to talk about, which is health and health tourism. A lot of doctors, if you're Indonesian and you go to Singapore or KL or even to Bangkok for treatment, they'll have an Indonesian doctor that accompanies you. It's a matter of how we can attract those back. The same within tech. A lot of them disappeared off to India, to US and Europe because they get better salaries. I think what the government has done and what they are continue to doing and hopefully will do, these will come back too. But I guess there's two ways: qualified talents and talents emerging. On talents emerging, I think I'd say 8. On talents that are already existing, qualified, maybe 6.
Wonderful. So now availability of projects, little asterisk, special economic zones you can include in this one. So availability of projects.
I can mention one business stream that we deal quite a bit with in terms of companies wanting to come in Jakarta, and this is renewable energy. Indonesia has made the commitment to be carbon neutral by 2060. That alone needs $1.1 trillion in investments. So you can break that down. It's something like $30 billion in just one aspect per year. The availability of projects is endless and immense. I guess so that I would have a 7 or 8, but maybe the regulations allowing for proper tenders, transparent tenders, and so on still has a way to go, and I say maybe 4 to 5, but hopefully that will change, yeah.
Great. Availability, I remember what it was, the 4th one. Availability of leadership.
Bali or Indonesia?
Oh, I knew you were going to say that. All right, you know what? Because it's you, we'll do both.
Okay. I think Indonesia is still, in many ways, in a transition, and sometimes you get questions. So Indonesia, it's not like Thailand. It doesn't have a coup once a year with the military sort of coming out and cleaning up. The military has a different position. They're very strong since 1965 and onwards, and still has a lot of elements. Like traditionally, when you retire as a general, you'd be a commissioner or a minister or something, and you can see this. That is a lot of talent in terms of leaders, maybe leaders with a narrative that needs to change, and I think that change is happening. And if you pay attention today in good and bad and the sort of talk about political dynasty and whatever else goes on, the vice president candidate Gibran is 35 years old, and there's a lot of controversy around what happened, but how he appears on stage is going to embrace the 60% of the votes that you talk about, that this is happening. They're listening to the young ones. He has taken on now twice a very seasoned politician, Chak Imin, leading one of the slightly Muslim-motivated political parties. I wouldn't say making a laugh, because that's not polite, but really showing that he knows his stuff. He's today the mayor of Solo. Same with the other opponent, which is a very seasoned, highly respected and beautiful minister of not just law, but the coordinating minister of all the police, military, and the legal system, showing that he knows his stuff. And I'm starting to show that I'm going to do the Gemoy, for those of you being Indonesian. But I think that transition still is ongoing, need to happen. But definitely, you can see now this young generation is coming, and they're taking over. They have the drive, they have the energy, they have the understanding of the changes that needs to happen. I think that will happen also in Bali, but I think Bali is a little bit behind the central government, which may make sense. But I think also in Bali there is a need for a change, and hopefully with this election we take one step, and then slowly we'll find the right talents and the right figures coming forward.
5th and final one. So availability of friendly government support.
Yeah, I think Indonesia as a country and people are friendly, and I think the government is friendly. I think the confusion that we get sometimes is that we struggle to accept or we want the legal system or the regulations to fit with our particular situation, and we can't understand why Indonesia don't want to adjust to me as an individual or some of our audience. So that again is back to the narrative, the overall understanding of where Indonesia is heading and what it's doing. To me is crystal clear, and there is no confusion in that when you look at the central government down to the province level. So the government is definitely supportive, but as we said, Indonesia is geopolitically neutral, and what you want to do here is on their terms. When you embrace that, you're open, you'll be successful, you'll do well, you'll have a wonderful life and very little challenges. If you're not, obviously they deal with it, yeah.
Wonderful. So look, we have about another minute or 2 minutes to go. So the last question I'm going to leave with you is, I think this would be a better question in terms of, it won't put you on the spot. So the context of tonight was about how to understand the history of Indonesia from a geopolitical, legal, historical perspective to empower you in your business. If you even don't have a business, but you're looking to spend some quality time here, how can you use that, understand that, to ensure that you create the brightest future for yourself and those around you, right? So that's the context, the container for tonight's show. So the last question, and I'll give you a few minutes as I kind of close before, I'll give you some time to think, is if there is anything else that maybe you'd like to reiterate or something that you'd like to say that maybe you haven't had the opportunity to say yet, I'll give you that time in about 30 seconds, okay? So for those of you here, just want to thank Tropical Nomad as ever. Tonight we have Brother Guzman, Hadis, Sister Ayu over there. This is episode 406. And as I mentioned before, you're welcome to come. It's better to come in person because every episode attracts the nucleus of people who are interested in that topic. So if you're interested, then watching this on YouTube isn't going to get you talking to somebody, right? And from the talking to somebody, actions come. So this is the reason why I strongly, highly suggest join our social channels. So when you find out what is on, if that appeals to you, just jump on a bike, whatever, get yourself here, because it'll be worth it. You know, we've got maybe 30 people here tonight or so, and you know, this is where the connections are really made, right? And for those in the expat community, that's very important. And we're all about unity or united in diversity. So we also have, you know, a thriving Indonesian community, and we have this beautiful mixture that happens, right? So that's why you should come in person. So next week, as I mentioned before, will be blockchain focused. It will be ICP Hub Disruptors. So it'll be Emilio Canessa, who's I think the head of engagement for ICP in the world. It's a top 20 project in the world. And then we have Bruno Calabretta, Grace Sabananda, and then Tom Corley. So if that interests you, the blockchain technology field, come. These guys are really, truly amazing. So I want to thank you, the audience, for coming. Great to see some new faces. Love that. And Brother Terje, we spoke about this, I don't know, maybe a year ago. It's only taken like 12 months to get here. But hey, at least we got here in the end. I just want to thank you because, again, as I mentioned before, it's rare air that you occupy of the consultants, of the legal professionals which are here that actually understand what's behind the guidelines, the regulations, and so on, and therefore able to empower us, the clients, the customers, with the knowledge. So maybe we don't wake up, you know, in the middle of the night with having one of those moments of, I'm going to be put in jail tomorrow, right? And you need that. You need someone who's got a steady hand, who knows what they're talking about, and I find you to be that person. So thank you for saying yes, Brother Terje. Now, the final question for you is that one of, you know, in the context of what we've been discussing tonight, is there anything left that you'd like to either reiterate or something new or fresh that you thought, you know what, I haven't had the opportunity to say that, and I think it's important that I do?
I'm the one who should say thank you to be able to come and talk to the audience, both offline and online. And I think we're brothers from another mother. We share many views. We can have our differences and still agree to disagree. And I think that, in a nutshell, is what Indonesia is all about. And I think, you know, things like this, you're doing a more than a brilliant job on getting that mindset out there, which is so important for the expat community, but also the Indonesian part, to understand what is happening. So I'm the one that should say thank you. There's a few things that I think of, and in particular towards the Indonesian economy, and there's some aspects of Indonesian economy that may be different from other countries. Like, we talked a bit about the GDP. 60% of Indonesia's GDP is produced by SMEs. And this is why Indonesia is so resilient against the ups and downs that happens in the economical world. All they do is focusing on their domestic market and the SMEs, and they cruise through over and over, financial crisis, whatever it is that has happened. As an expat, we can do a lot in that space. There's actually a lot of incentives if you have cooperations with SMEs, or try to also goodwill to try to do that. And it makes an awful lot of sense, in the sense that supporting SMEs supports the economy of where you're actually doing your business and making money. 97% of Indonesia's labor force is in that space, so it's an enormous figure. These things we're not aware of, and I think we can do a lot. And like I said, there are incentives, regulation-wise and also tax-wise, on exploring those, and something we can talk about. But that, I think, is what is so interesting, and what we talked about, the passion, which I hope more and more expats can find. There is a impact. You make an impact investment. You may not know, but you are through those aspects and moments. Yeah.
Wonderful. Everyone, round of applause. Terje Nilsen, Seven Stones Indonesia.